VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
Well, thank you for joining us today on Crosstalk. My name is Jim Schneider, and we trust today's program is going to be provocative for you as we consider where we are heading as a nation. Are we going in the right direction? Are we setting ourselves up for failure as a nation? We're going to be discussing some of these issues here today with a powerful clip that's been out and making its way through the internet at this time. Joining us here for the discussion is Robert Romano, who is the senior editor with Americans for Limited Government. Robert, thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk.
Hey, it's great to be on. Thanks for having us back.
Tell us a bit, what is the mission of Americans for Limited Government?
Well, much like it sounds, we want to limit the size and scope of government and its power to intrude upon the American people's lives and our future prosperity. So that means less spending, balance the budget, pay down the debt, less regulations on our business climate so that we can be creating jobs instead of having 27 million people looking for full-time work, as is the present situation. Are your concerns growing or are they easing? The more we learn, the less there is to like. Much like as you read about Obamacare, the more we learn about it, the worse it gets. And over at ObamacareWatcher.org, for example, ALG's been monitoring the regulations that come forward from that monstrosity of legislation, and it's just not good. For every law that's out there, there's perhaps hundreds, especially those that affect the economy. There are hundreds of regulations that underpin those laws, and they're often not good. And like I said, the more we learn about what the Obama administration particularly has been up to these past 3 years, the worse it looks. Americans for Limited Government has unveiled a piece, and we're going to be listening to it here in just a moment. It's entitled, "If I Wanted America to Fail." Tell us about the background of this. Sure. It's based on Paul Harvey's classic radio clip called "If I Were the Devil" that was published back in the 1960s. But using that as the inspiration, Americans for Limited Government launched freemarketamerica.org. The executive director, who you'll see featured in the video, Ryan Houck, was largely the writer on this video, which I think is a very powerful statement on what we're risking as a nation is failure if we continue to implement these policies that are just restrict the growth of the U.S. economy. Well, folks, we're going to listen to this. It's about 4.5 minutes long. Then we're going to come back and discuss this further as to the message that is coming through this. It's entitled, "If I Wanted America to Fail." Listen.
If I wanted America to fail, to follow, not lead, to suffer, not prosper, to despair, not dream, I'd start with energy. I'd cut off America's supply of cheap, abundant energy. I couldn't take it by force, so I'd make Americans feel guilty about using the energy that heats their homes, fuels their cars, runs their businesses, and powers their economy. I'd make cheap energy expensive, so that expensive energy would seem cheap. I would empower unelected bureaucrats to all but outlaw America's most abundant sources of energy. After banning its use in America, I'd make it illegal for American companies to ship it overseas. If I wanted America to fail, I'd use their schools to teach one generation of Americans that their factories and their cars will cause a new ice age, and I'd muster a straight face so I could teach the next generation that they're causing global warming. When it's cold out, I'd call it climate change instead. I'd imply that America's cities and factories could run on wind power and wishes. I'd teach children how to ignore the hypocrisy of condemning logging, mining, and farming while having roofs over their heads, heat in their homes, and food on their tables. I would never teach children that the free market is the only force in human history to uplift the poor, establish the middle class, and create lasting prosperity. Instead, I demonize prosperity itself so that they will not miss what they will never have. If I wanted America to fail, I would create countless new regulations and seldom cancel old ones. They would be so complicated that only bureaucrats, lawyers, and lobbyists could understand them. That way small businesses with big ideas wouldn't stand a chance. And I would never have to worry about another Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, or Steve Jobs. I would ridicule as flat earthers those who urge them to lower energy costs by increasing supply. And when the evangelists of common sense try to remind people about the laws of supply and demand, I'd enlist the sympathetic media to drown them out. If I wanted America to fail, I would empower unaccountable bureaucracy seated in a distant capital to bully Americans out of their dreams and their property rights. I'd send federal agents to raid guitar factories for using the wrong kind of wood. I'd force homeowners to tear down their own homes built on their own land. I'd make it almost impossible for farmers to farm, miners to mine, loggers to log, and builders to build. Because I don't believe in free markets, I'd invent false ones. I'd devise fictitious products like carbon credits and trade them in imaginary markets. I'd convince people that this would create jobs and be good for the economy. If I wanted America to fail, for every concern I'd invent a crisis, and for every crisis I'd invent the cause, like shutting down entire industries and killing tens of thousands of jobs in the name of saving spotted owls. And when everyone learned the stunning irony that the owls were victims of their larger cousins and not people, it would already be decades too late. If I wanted America to fail, I'd make it easier to stop commerce than to start it, easier to kill jobs than create them, more fashionable to resent success than to seek it. When industries seek to create jobs, I'd file lawsuits to stop them, and then I'd make taxpayers pay for my lawyers. If I wanted America to fail, I would transform the environmental agenda from a document of conservation to an economic suicide pact. I would concede entire industries to our economic rivals by imposing regulations that cost trillions. I would celebrate those who preach environmental austerity in public while indulging a lavish lifestyle in private. I convince Americans that Europe has it right and that America has it wrong. If I wanted America to fail, I would prey on the goodness and the decency of ordinary Americans. I would only need to convince them that all of this is for the greater good. If I wanted America to fail, I suppose I wouldn't change a thing.
Quite a powerful piece there, Robert.
Well, thank you. It's definitely exceeded our expectations for in terms of viewership. The amount of attention that this is getting, and it's been overdrudged, and Rush had it up. It's been on Fox News for a few segments, and it's been making the rounds. It's certainly giving us pause. We liked the video. We knew it was good. We just didn't realize it would go as far as it has.
Where is it our viewers and listeners can watch this?
You can see it at freemarketamerica.org, and also it's posted on YouTube. So if you just go to YouTube and you type in "If I Wanted America to Fail," you'll find the video, which is already over 1.78 million views.
What is the point you're seeking to make with this piece?
Well, if we want to fail, we should basically do nothing. In terms of changing our governmental policies, and we can be specific about that. For example, the EPA's carbon endangerment finding in 2009 will severely restrict carbon emissions in the U.S. economy, and depending on how restrictive the EPA wants to be, in terms of implementing those regulations, it's going to have a necessary economic impact on the price of gasoline, of coal-based electricity, natural gas, anything that emits carbon, essentially. But if it's too restrictive and it becomes so expensive that you can't afford to travel to work or distribute goods and services, it could be devastating. Think about the Industrial Revolution and the population explosion that has resulted from that over the past 200 years, and a large part of that is based upon the ability to produce energy and to grow the economy and to be able to distribute goods and services, particularly food. If you take that away, if you want to severely restrict carbon emissions or eliminate them, I think what you would see is a necessary decline in both the economy and population.
Let's talk further about this EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. Just in the hours leading up to the program today, we learned that a top EPA official, Al Armendariz, the top environmental official in the oil-rich South and Southwest region, resigned effective today over remarks which he made comparing their enforcement strategy to that of a Roman execution, basically using the illustration that Romans would go into a city, find the first 5 people, crucify them, make them an example so that they could take control over that city for the next few years because people feared them. And in the same way, he likened the EPA to do this with businesses, hit them as hard as you can to act as a deterrent to others. I mean, has that been the MO of the EPA?
Apparently, although the official now resigned, wants to say that he's resigning because what he said was a distraction. I'm not sure it was really a distraction. It actually kind of confirms a lot of people's suspicions and is really shining a light on what the EPA is doing and why they're doing it and the attitude with which they carry themselves around to think that their role is to crucify the private sector. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's what the American people think about when they think about environmental protection. As we state in the video, what was once a document of conservation is, it's now becoming an economic suicide pact, and we don't want to go in that direction. I think you can have conservation without undermining the future prosperity of the entire nation and thinking that you need to go out and crucify oil and gas companies. And no, let's throw coal in there too. Another EPA regulation just issued, finalized this year, would supposedly reduce the low amount of mercury that's emitted by coal-fired plants. Well, here's the gag. Several thousand tons of mercury are emitted every single year from volcanoes, deep-sea hydrothermal vents, geysers, forest fires, you name it, far beyond anything the coal-fired plants in the U.S. are doing. So what is the effect of the regulation? Even if it lowers the amount of U.S. emissions of mercury, is that 99% of the mercury that's being emitted every single year won't be affected by the regulation. Yet it's going to cost billions of dollars for these coal-fired plants to retrofit their power plants to be in compliance with these new regulations that's going to have little effect, yet it's very costly.
Yeah, and today it was your organization sent out a press release urging the U.S. Senate to adopt SJRES, Senate Joint Resolution 37, to overturn these EPA regulations.
That's right, and it's highly critical. Fortunately, it only takes 51 members of the Senate and a majority of the House to overturn any regulation, and this can't be filibustered. So what merely needs to happen is the majority of both houses say this regulation is not good and we're going to rescind it, and then it won't take effect. But it's hard to say. It's hard to predict how that's going to come down. I can't think of an example where Congress has successfully overturned a regulation, at least in recent memory.
Robert Romano is our guest here today on Crosstalk. The title today, If I Wanted America to Fail, where you will have some more discussion about the EPA and other issues here after the break. You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY America Network.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, what causes animals to go extinct?
Chris, any number of causes could bring about the extinction of an animal population. Evolutionists propose a great meteorite impact that caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. But this, in their book, was not the greatest animal extinction. That occurred at the end of the Permian period, before the dinosaurs. They claim it was a time of great stability in which animals didn't evolve and then suffered rapid extinction. Remember, their understanding of rapid extinction is different than mine, but we can learn from this that the evidence shows things stay the same. They don't evolve, and that rapid catastrophic processes lay down the fossils. And this is exactly what creationists say. They point to the Great Flood mentioned back in Genesis as a mechanism for animal death and burial.
Thanks, Dr. John. For more on creation, visit our website at www.icr.org.
If I Wanted America to Fail, a powerful piece that has been put forth by Americans for Limited Government. You can see it at freemarketamerica.org. We're talking with Robert Romano, who is the senior editor with Americans for Limited Government here today. Let's talk a little bit more about this video clip. Do you really believe that America or Americans are made to feel guilty by the energy we use?
I think so, yes. If you want to focus on things like Earth Day and the promotion via our school system, the idea of just promoting this environmentalist agenda throughout our education system is an example I think you could point at where people are made to feel guilty about consumption, natural resource consumption, and things like that. And I think just in our media, that's highly prevalent. If you look at movies like Avatar, for example, extremely popular and entertainment, but at the same time was about the misuse of natural resources. And I think maybe sending the wrong message, which is that we need to use natural resources to sustain ourselves as an economy and really to feed the world. Without that use, really, you're not seeing a very high world population. I think that population sustainability needs to be at the forefront of natural resource discussion and the use of those natural resources. And if we're going to grow as an economy, you don't want to have 27 million people looking for full-time work out there. We need to be able to grow. We need to be able to expand. We need to be able to build things without having onerous regulations constraining our ability to do that via the private sector, which, by the way, is where you're going to get most of your jobs from. Not everyone can work for the government. You have a few million people that work for the federal government and many million more that work for state and local governments, but the vast majority of Americans have to work in the private sector, and the EPA and state environmental protection agencies are out to wreck the private sector, to crucify the private sector, particularly if it depends on energy use that are carbon-based energies, coal, oil, gasoline, natural gas, etc. And by the way, that's most of our economy. It depends on those things. So why do they want to crucify the production or anyone that's trying to expand it?
So we are systematically making it more difficult to mine and log in this country?
Yes, we are. If you looked at the situation out in the Sierra Nevadas and what's happened to the logging industry out there is directly attributable to environmental regulations, specifically you can look at the example of the spotted owls and the barred owls and how that kind of came together to ruin a logging industry that's out there. And for every community out there, there's a local example, there's a national example, there's a state example where you can point to these regulations and the impact that they have on local businesses.
You have a statement in this video clip that we just listened to the audio from about raiding guitar factories because the wrong kind of wood was used. What's that all about?
That was Gibson Guitar was raided by federal officials toting guns. It actually happened where they wanted to shut down the facility of Gibson Guitar literally because it didn't meet with a particular regulation to do with the type of wood that's allowed to be used. It's totally absurd. But you think about the overseas competitors that don't have to deal with these types of constraints, and they can just sell guitars here in America regardless of how it was made. So the idea is that we're not going to make things here in America anymore because why bother if you can just make make similar items overseas without the same restrictions that the federal government is imposing upon businesses that try to dare do business here.
The piece is entitled, If I Wanted America to Fail, and what about energy policies? Are we destined for failure as a nation if we continue to follow the current trajectory of our energy policies?
Well, if we're going to depend on overseas for oil in particular and gasoline, then I think we're in for a rude awakening years down the road. We're only producing about 5 million barrels of oil a day. We used to produce 9 million barrels back in 1970 when Richard Nixon was declaring that we needed to be energy independent, and we consume several million more barrels than that. So I think that if we want to not fail as a nation. We need to figure out how to get more of our energy to be internally produced, because right now we're very fortunate that the world commodity markets, particularly oil, are traded and denominated in U.S. dollars. That's because of our reserve currency status. It was part of the reason how the oil embargo back in the early 70s was brought to an end, was the deal between the Nixon administration and Saudi Arabia to do just that, to trade oil in dollars. And that has actually kept the price of oil relatively low for a long time. But because of inflation, because certain nations like Iran, Russia and China are trying to break free from dollar supremacy, that we're starting to see more inflation in the dollar. The Federal Reserve has printed several trillions of dollars in recent years to prop up the economy, and this too has had an inflationary effect that's driving up the cost of oil. So if they come off the dollar standard, the world does, and they dumped U.S. Treasuries, for example, you're going to see all those dollars come back home, and oil and gasoline is going to be unaffordable for the American people and for the economy. So I think we have several interests at stake to make certain that we are energy independent, but also that we're also carrying on sound fiscal and monetary policies so that our reserve currency status isn't so threatened. There's a lot of big problems going on right now that I think do threaten America's future prosperity, and we do run the risk of failing. Is $4 a gallon of gasoline too high for everyone? How would you like it in 10 years if we were paying $10 a gallon for gasoline? Do you think you'll be making twice as much money in 10 years?
On another issue, several years ago we were told that we were heading to the inevitable ice age. Then we were told, no, it's the inevitable global warming. Which is it, Robert?
Good question. Certainly the government and the education system and science is the jury's out on all this stuff. We're constantly examining as a human race what is going on with physical processes. So near as I can tell, the biggest predictor for climate changes will be solar activity. I mean, I can't think of anything else that would have a greater impact. As you head out further into the solar system, what happens to the temperature of the planets? The temperature goes down. Why? Because it's farther away from the sun. Why is it warmer in the summer than in the winter? Because of the angle of the inclination of the sun has the northern hemisphere angled towards the sun in the summer and away from the sun in the winter. So with a lesser angle of inclination, you're going to have colder days and nights. And so that alone would explain temperature variability that you see just in the seasonally, and as depending on where you are in the solar system, how hot it's going to be. So why would we think that we could somehow control the climate by taking carbon that's already in the environment and re-emitting it into the atmosphere, which is then eaten by the plants? That is the primary driver of global temperatures? I don't think so. I mean, several geologists have come forward saying, no, this is not what drives temperature. And the jury's still out on whether or not the human race is destroying the planet or we're going to all cook to death because we were driving around in cars to get to work. I don't think that's true.
So in essence, we're demonizing prosperity.
Well, we're not only demonizing it, we're regulating it. And they're basing government policies and laws and court rulings off of this science, which may not even be correct. That doesn't seem like a very deliberative way to approach an issue. And even when the academic discussion's still going on, why are we regulating these the carbon endangerment finding in 2009 by the EPA? That's exactly what they did. They said the jury is in. It's 12-0. We are destroying the planet, so we are going to regulate severely and give the EPA sole power in the United States over any other agency, over Congress, over the president, to regulate carbon emissions. And if the other branches of government don't like it, well, they just have to take it. If the American people don't like it, tough. If the American industries can't handle it or they can't afford it, tough.
Robert Romano is our guest here today on Crosstalk. And Robert, I'd like to get your comment on another issue here. We, of course, do not endorse candidates for office through this program, but we do inform on issues. And there was an informational story that came out over the past couple of days from WND, WorldNet Daily, the Communist Party USA, because this is something we're seeing, a growing government, a more entrenching government in the lives of people, but the Communist Party USA isn't always happy with the Democrats, but in the 2012 election, I'm reading from the article, its chairman says the best bet for advancing the party's goal, this is the Communist Party USA, the best bet for advancing their goals is to back Barack Obama, they said. In a report, Defeating the Right Wing and the Road to Socialism, delivered to the Communist Party USA annual conference, party chairman Sam Webb moved to squash sentiments that disgruntled communists should jump off the Democrat ship and back a third-party candidate. He said, I can understand those sentiments, but only up to a point. Like it or not, millions go to the polls in spite of their misgivings, and the Democratic Party is a vehicle of reform for tens of millions, the majority of whom are working and oppressed people. Therefore, Webb said, communists need to join other left-wing leaning allies in ensuring Republicans are defeated in November. Other speakers in the conference shared their support behind Obama, including the executive vice president of the Communist Party USA, Jarvis Tyler, saying, these right-wing nutjobs need to understand we are not going back. If Obama is elected, of course, there will be a struggle that the Democratic forces could win. I'd say if he is defeated, the movement will suffer a big setback and the country will be pushed backwards. What's your response to the Communist Party USA saying that we need to have Barack Obama in there to best advance the party's goals, the Communist Party's goals?
Good question. Well, I mean, they're saying it themselves. The Marxist philosophy is obviously based on Karl Marx and his Communist Manifesto, where he writes that, simply put, what is communism is the abolition of private property. And so the Communist Party of the United States is saying that the best route to abolishing private property is to re-elect Barack Obama. I mean, I guess that kind of speaks for itself.
And is that the trajectory we're on right now as a nation?
Well, think about it. Even if you're done paying off your mortgage, which by then you're almost ready to die, based upon the fixed 30-year rates that we tend to take as a country, then even if you're done paying that off, if you don't pay your property taxes, you could lose your property. When you think about inheritance and what you're going to pass on to your children, and you think of the inheritance tax, where close to 50% of what you leave to your children is actually going to go to the government. That was actually a plank in the Communist Manifesto. I mean, there's other aspects of what Marx wrote about that there are policies that we have implemented. How far down that road are we? Hard to say. I'm not sure Marx was correct in terms of how what would happen to advanced economies. In certain respects, he was right about what would happen. Are we anywhere closer to this kind of one world communist state where we're all worker bees inside of this hive acting like insects and totally devoid of human nature? Nowhere near that. And we never will be, because what Marx was writing about was an abomination to human nature.
You're listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America. A couple more questions with our guest, and then we'll be getting to the phone line, so stand by. You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY America Network.
Mormonism has been increasing its profile across the United States. Author Ron Rhodes says, although claiming to be Christians, Mormons depart from historical Christianity on a number of essential doctrines. In his book, The 10 Most Important Things You Can Say to a Mormon, Ron Rhodes provides fact-filled, easy-to-understand, and essential information to effectively witness biblical truths to people led astray by this false teaching. In this book, you'll discover tools you need to effectively talk to Mormons about their faith and guide them to the biblical God, the biblical Jesus, and the biblical gospel. You'll understand the Mormons' view of the Bible, the origin of the Book of Mormon, the consequences of not acknowledging the Trinity, and the inadequacy of a gospel of works. To obtain your copy of The 10 Most Important Things You Can Say to a Mormon, send a donation of $12 or more to VCY America, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. To donate by phone, call 1-800-729-9829.
You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America. Robert Romano is our guest here today, senior editor with Americans for Limited Government. Their powerful piece that's come out, If I Wanted America to Fail, and you can see it at freemarketamerica.org. Robert, as we talk about this issue, we have those who say, hey, we need to increase our supply of energy. That's where we need to go as a nation. Others say, no, we need to conserve. We need to scale back. We need to do better at what we use. Can you give us your take on this discussion back and forth and the consequences has on a business and just maintaining our position as an industrialized nation?
Absolutely. I think if we want to remain the world's economic superpower, we need to continue. I mean, we are a large nation, and just to distribute goods and services around, just the ability to travel. I mean, think about your commutes going to and from work every day. And for many commuters, that could be like 30 miles. It could be like 50 miles. You're not getting there at least part of the way without your motor vehicle, and you need to use it. And right now, the best form of energy for motor vehicles happens to be gasoline, which happens to be carbon-based. More units per more units of power per a unit of energy that's there than other forms of energy. I mean, you're not going to get to a car on a windmill. Even these battery-operated cars are very expensive, for one thing, so they're not exactly affordable for average Americans. So you'd have to take out a big loan to do that. I'm not sure it's very financially responsible to go that way if you're already in debt on your mortgage or student loans or things like that. But leaving that aside, you have to, in order to operate it, you need electricity. And, guess what that runs on? Coal. I mean, in some cases, you'll have nuclear power, and I think that's a great idea for electricity in the future. Why don't we split atoms? We could be, you could be powering much of the country. Heck, you could even be recycling the nuclear fuel. But, oh, wait, in an executive order in the late 1970s, President Jimmy Carter did away with recycling of fuel in the United States. Good job, Jimmy. And he was a nuclear physicist. He should have known better that we could have actually not had to store all of this nuclear fuel under a mountain and the regulatory costs that go along with that. But nonetheless, in his infinite wisdom, President Carter back then made it so that we had to store nuclear fuel under a mountain, even though we could recycle it. And just to give you an idea of how many billions of dollars we're spending every year to store that fuel. That doesn't make sense, and that's just one example. Again, there's just for every aspect of the economy you can think of. There's regulations that are behind that are adding to the cost that American people pay on an annual basis. And if we really do want to fail as a nation, we'll allow the EPA and other agencies to continue issuing those regulations by fiat without any vote in Congress and regardless of the cost to the economy.
And it really begs the question then, Robert, what can I do as an individual? I mean, we're talking about some pretty huge problems here. When we're talking about the EPA and their power, we're talking about the whole energy policies of our nation, all the environmental regulations out there. Bring it down to the citizen level. What can a sole person do in regard to this issue?
Well, you got to talk to your members of Congress. I mean, it all boils back to that, but they're the last line of defense when it comes to these sorts of issues. And in terms of taking on the agencies and being able to direct the agencies to take actions, that is Congress's responsibility, is to make the laws. The president will sign the laws. And, I mean, this is a continual process. We're a republic, so you can't just, there's no top-down approach. You just can't appoint a dictator and say, we're going to do away with all these regulations, and then poof, they're presto, they're gone.
Oh, you forgot about the executive order.
The executive order. I mean, that's not going to, you can't repeal laws with an executive order.
Yeah, but we sure are creating them.
That's true.
Yeah.
And the Carter example is I guess you could do an executive order to rescind the Carter executive order. But those circumstances are rare indeed, where a simple stroke of the pen and having the right president in charge would make such a difference. But again, your elected officials are important in terms of making these decisions. It's not all being done internally and bureaucratically. In the court system, for example, in the EPA v. Massachusetts case, that was where they initially ruled that the EPA could regulate carbon dioxide as a harmful pollutant under the terms of the Clean Air Act. And that was a court decision, and that's what the EPA's authority for its decision rests on. But now that it's implemented, once they start executing the new regulations that come off of that, will be further opportunities for affected businesses and stakeholders to file suit in federal court to try to overturn these things. Just because the Supreme Court ruled on that once doesn't mean that they're beyond reversing their ruling. And numerous examples throughout the court's history where you can think of the court reversing itself on issues. Right before it did back in the Depression era, the wheat farmer who wanted to grow wheat on his farm, and it was deemed to interfere with interstate commerce and price controls, even though he was a subsistence farmer and he was eating it himself and for his family. It was deemed that he could be regulated from doing so, that you're not allowed to grow food for yourself, or by how much we say. But just a few years earlier than that, the court was ruling against the intra-state commerce theory that the FDR administration was proposing at the time. And so it can flip really quickly. So I think that a court strategy is also something that we, the American people, can be doing.
You're listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America. We'd like to open our phone lines to give you opportunity to make a comment. Perhaps you want to comment on that piece that you heard, If I Wanted America to Fail, a powerful piece. If you have a question regarding the ever-encroaching government on EPA regulations, energy policy, etc., our number is 1-800-733-9829. 1-800-733-9829. And folks, where is this leading us as a nation? These policies we're seeing, of course, businesses that are being demonized, and businesses that are not able to contain. They're not able to grow. They're not able to exist because the encroaching government stepping down on them with all the regulations. And even as society, I mean, just last week, I think it was, we learned about the bankruptcy of both Medicare and Social Security are accelerating faster than anticipated here, Robert. And it seems everywhere, we turn around, we're really just shooting ourselves in the foot with the policies that we are instituting.
Now, it's hard to think of an example of a government policy that's not being screwed up right now. And you mentioned Social Security and Medicare. Yeah, in just a little over 20 years, we're going to see the Social Security Trust Fund dry up, and then we're going to see a significant reduction of benefits that were once promised, so now you're going to be getting pennies on the dollar for your Social Security. And Medicare, same deal. Much sooner, that trust fund is set to expire in about 10, 15 years. And again, you're going to see a severe reduction in benefits or an increase in payroll taxes for younger generations who, as they pay into the system, do not have a certainty they'll receive anywhere close to what they're being asked to put into it. And it's not really a good deal. And so I think that on that situation, younger generations should be allowed to set aside funds for themselves for their retirement and their pensions and their senior health care. Couldn't there be a senior health care company that you pay into when you're young and then actually pays out benefits in accordance with an actuarial formula, as opposed to what the government's doing with these defined benefits programs that just pay out whatever Congress says is the cost of living adjustment? Okay, that's great if you're the one who's collecting it right now, but what about future generations? And yes, seniors depend on these programs, but do you want your children and grandchildren to depend on a program that will decline in quality over time and will be unable to make ends meet in the end?
That's certainly another full program in itself. Mark in Olney, Illinois. Go ahead. You're on the air with Robert Romano.
Yeah, Robert, thank you for being on the air. Yeah, I've talked to numerous people about a problem we've got here, and nobody seems to take it serious. The EPA has authorized these green people to go around and collect CO2 out of the power plants. And they're trying to do a 28,000-acre land grab here to collect the CO2 off just 4 power plants. You multiply that times the whole nation, and a conservative estimate is that they're going to double all electric rates on these 4 power plants. And I added that mercury thing you were talking about. It sounds like they're just going to tax or regulate coal out of the business.
More or less. Where are you based out of, sir?
Southern Illinois.
Southern Illinois, and you said that they're. I'm not familiar with the issue, but you said the EPA is trying to take out 28,000 acres.
No, they've authorized these green people, and I don't have the name in front of me, to lease 28,000 acres to store CO2 underground from 4 power plants.
Wow.
And I went to the public meeting and said, why do we want to be a part of this hoax? And they said, well, don't you want to make money on a hoax? I says, no, I don't want any part of it. We're a landowner in this thing, so we were at the town meeting.
Wow, sir. I can assure you that ALG will be looking into that. I mean, I just found that profoundly amazing. Here, 28,000 acres. Wow. I mean, this is land that the American people could be using, and here we're setting it aside to save carbon dioxide, which flows freely through the atmosphere. I mean, this is just remarkable. Thank you very much.
Hey, excuse me. I think it's Willow Creek are the people pushing it.
Oh, okay. I'll take that down.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that call here. To John in West Milwaukee, you're on the air.
Yes, I'll ask my question and then hang up. How much has that BP oil disaster affected and influenced what's going on around here?
Okay, thank you, John.
Well, that certainly affected the Obama administration's decision to put a moratorium on deep water drilling in the Gulf and elsewhere. And that's had an impact on our overall production in the Gulf. Although domestic production has actually increased slightly, it's because the gains made in the Bakken oil shale and other formations have exceeded the reduction in Obama's reduction of deep water oil drilling. And if not for the oil shale, I think that we would be seeing an overall decrease in domestic production right now, which, by the way, the shale production is going on in spite of Obama administration policies, and they haven't even gotten around to regulating fully the fracking process. But just watch, they'll say it's causing earthquakes or something, and then they'll be wanting to shut that down too.
To Hermiston, Oregon, Shirley, you're on the air.
Yes. I'd like to preface my comment by saying we live in eastern Oregon, close to the Columbia River, which there is a port of Umatilla and Morrow counties, and we received a letter from our state representative asking us for support for a project that they want to go into the port of Morrow County, in which coal would be by rail, would come from Montana area and would then end up at the port of Morrow, put on barges, sent down the river, and then would go through the trade and end up in Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, whatever. And yet we have a power plant in our area that my husband retired from that is going to have to close.
Wow. Tell you what, we've got a break on us here, but I'll have him respond to that right after the break.
Okay.
Thank you, Shirley. We'll be back in just 60 seconds. You're listening to Crosstalk on the VCY American Network. We'll be right back.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewweekend.com. We're continuing on our list of 20 characteristics of false teachers embraced by the false church. Number 6, false teachers embrace mysticism. Colossians 2:18 says, "Let no one cheat you of your reward, taking delight in false humility and worship of angels." Indeed, that's Gnosticism. That's mysticism. It's this idea that we need to encounter the spiritual world and find out some hidden secrets. This is exactly what the Scripture says don't do. But yet this is what is promoted through the New Age movement. It's promoted in what is called the emergent church or the new spirituality, that you need to have a spiritual experience, encounter the silence, encounter angels or even Jesus. But I believe indeed what they're encountering is the demonic world. And they're worshiping angels and seeking this secret information. Whereas 2 Timothy 3 tells us the Word of God is complete. We don't need anything else. So the Bible says don't mess around with mysticism or Gnosticism. And that's exactly what false teachers do. Our website, worldviewweekend.com.
If I Wanted America to Fail, a powerful clip, a video clip. We played the audio portion of it here today on Crosstalk. You can check it out at freemarketamerica.org. Robert, an interesting call there just before the break. We're producing all this coal coming down from Montana, going out to the port, shipping it off to Japan. They said, we have plants here that are closing down for lack of those resources or not being able to use those resources.
That's a pretty sad situation indeed. And I guess those who are supporting the environmental regulations don't mind paying extra in electricity bills, and they must be really rich to have such a callous disregard for everybody else who is just struggling to make ends meet. And when utility bills increase by tens of dollars or even hundreds of dollars, over the next 15, 20 years because of these regulations and because we're restricting our ability to even produce energy. I hope at some stage along the way we have something of a reconsideration of those policies and that they're not just being implemented from on high and nobody's allowed to question them, and don't you dare question the science, and you're a flat earther if you don't accept this premise that we're destroying the planet. Well, I don't know if we're destroying the planet or not, but I know we're destroying our economy, and these regulators are to blame.
To Lake Delton, Wisconsin, Carl, you're on the air.
Hey, may the Holy Spirit of God bless your ministries and make this a beacon that the world might see, the United States might see anyway. Right now we can buy gas from Canada for $32 a barrel. We wouldn't have a national debt if we begin selling gas. We have enough gas approximately to last for 140 years. So why this manipulation of gas is going so bad is because they're trying to bankrupt our country. Every time gas goes up, all of our products go up. Everything on the shelf goes up. It's a conspiracy to control us and to control the economy and actually bankrupt the U.S.
What do you think, Robert?
Well, I don't know if there's a conspiracy or not, but the price of oil is not getting much cheaper. I mean, you're still at about $100 a barrel for oil. In 2008, it spiked upwards to about $150 a barrel, although in 2010 actually 2011 was actually a higher average price for oil than in 2008. And so, therefore, in 2011, we spent more money on gasoline and oil-based products than we did ever in our history. And is that a direct result of these policies, whether on the regulatory side, energy, environment, restriction of supply? Yes. And in terms of our inflationary policies on the fiscal and monetary side of the equations, yes. Those are all having an impact. Are those being coordinated in an effort to drive up the price of oil and gasoline? I'm not sure. But Barack Obama said that necessarily the price of electricity would skyrocket in order for green alternative energies would seem viable. So a point we touch on in our video. I mean, there is some sense amongst policymakers who want to incentivize the green alternatives like solar and wind by making other conventional forms of energy more expensive. So perhaps it is deliberate, but it's really hard to see into the motives and intentions of any individual, let alone a vast bureaucracy.
We need to move on to Burlington. Edie, go ahead. You're on the air.
I was just going to say that if I wanted America to fail, I would forget that it was founded on a miracle, which George Washington, when he was facing the Redcoats, the number of his troops was way smaller than theirs were, and they were on their last money and their last everything, and yet, by God's grace, they won. I would also forget that it was founded on a covenant, which is the Mayflower Compact, and that God is a covenant keeper. I would also not ever pray for a real Christian candidate. We don't currently have one on either of the tickets, but I guess I am just audacious enough to believe that we can pray for one that isn't on either ticket, and we can thereby, vote our conscience, because right now I'm not comfortable with any of them.
Thank you, Edie, for your thoughts here today. Harris, Minnesota. Don, you're on the air.
Yeah, excuse me. I'm just going back to the 70s during that oil embargo.
Mm-hmm.
And there was two magazines, or in one of the two magazines, an article either in Time or Newsweek, and the gentleman that wrote the article, he said that he uses garbage like we have a ton of it here, and he uses that, and he does what he said. It took nature, a few years to do, but he come up with a better grade of crude oil than what they call the Texas sweet crude. And he said, but his biggest stumbling block was government bureaucracy.
We're going to have just a minute and a half left. Any comment there, Robert?
Well, I'm not familiar with that the garbage into oil story, but I guess it wouldn't be surprising. But that said, I mean, if there's alternatives to the conventional oil that we're getting out of the ground right now, the reason why we do it the way they do it is because of the efficiency with which you get from drilling and the amount of energy you can get out of that. And clearly, we're drilling millions of barrels a day worldwide and consuming millions of barrels a day worldwide. So we've obviously found an efficient means of getting the energy out of the ground. If for alternatives to be brought to the market, if they're marketly viable, there's no reason why companies are not going to be able to profit off of them and be able to employ people as a result.
Thank you for the call here, and with less than a minute left, let me ask you this, Robert: are we at a point of no return?
Absolutely not. There's never things are never so bad that they can't be made to get better, and that is the human condition. From generation to generation, so we pass along all of our problems in many ways to our children and grandchildren. But at the same time, we're solving problems today that were created years, if not centuries ago. So I think that we're in a constant state of flux in the kaleidoscope of time of human history, and there will be a day of reckoning, and there's ebbs and flows here, the waxing and waning of these types of policies. And I don't think this regime or any regime is intended to last for all time. And so we won't suffer under this tyranny for much longer, I hope. freemarketamerica.org, and you've got another site, Robert? You can check out Americans for Limited Government's daily material at netrightdaily.com. Netrightdaily.com.
Robert, thanks for being with us today.
Hey, have a good day.
Robert Romano has been our guest here today on Crosstalk, and the question, if I wanted America to fail, check out the video, share it with others as well. Thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. Or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.